Um, just for those of you who've never been here before, I just want to let you know a little bit how our meetings work right off the bat. I'll be introducing Carolyn tonight, and she'll have roughly 30 minutes to speak, and then I'll be taking a speaker list for speakers, and then she'll have time to wrap up after all the speakers are done. Okay? And just so everyone knows as well, this is a pro-choice meeting, and for tonight's meeting, this is also a pro-choice space. So please respect that space. And now moving on to Carolyn. Carolyn is a sorry.
That's right.
Moving on to me introducing Carolyn. Said. Carolyn is a longtime trade union activist, president of Steelworkers Local 8300 and the Steelworker Area Council. She came to Canada with her partner as a Vietnam War resister and became active in the Women's Liberation Movement, which is part of what she's speaking about today. Well, actually speaking about her role as a key organizer in the fight to strike down the abortion law, and that's what we'll be hearing about. She continues to fight for women's right to choose as a member of the Ontario Coalition of Abortion Clinics, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about that later, about how you can get involved with them. And Carolyn is also a leading member of the International Socialists. So now we'll move on to Carolyn.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Melissa. All right. Probably you can hear me even if it's low or high or. It's fine. I think it's fine, right? You can hear me? Not loud enough? I can speak louder. Is that better? Okay. All right. So let me just move this just so I don't kick the first thing. Okay. Well, thanks for coming out today. And some of you probably were at pro-choice rally that took place on Saturday, and it was called for a whole range of reasons. And it was part of a Pan-Canadian Day of Action, and the call was for reproductive justice, equal access now. And the reason people across the country have come together, I think anyone who's been reading the papers has a pretty good understanding that the anti-choice, or those who are opposed to women's reproductive justice, women's reproductive freedom, and the right to abortion in this country, have been gaining confidence over the last few years, particularly because of the role of the Conservative government. Harper has said that he doesn't want to reopen the abortion debate, but if you look at what has been consistently happening, it's not what is concretely on the agenda of a large number of the members of the Conservative Party of Canada. You can look at things very easily. International Planned Parenthood, for example, which had been traditionally funded by the federal government, was first denied funding entirely. And then when finally, after pressure, it was given funding, it could only operate in countries where abortion was absolutely illegal. And I think, as anyone knows who looked at the international situation, over 40,000 women, mostly in developing countries, mostly racialized women, die every year, and hundreds of thousands have injuries and ongoing infection and difficulties because of botched abortions. You can look at the situation when the G8 was here in Canada, and the Harper government put forward a maternal health policy. And this policy initially didn't even include contraception. And then secondly, it didn't include abortion. Finally, contraception was allowed on the table, but abortion absolutely not. And I think we've seen over the past number of years as well that MPs of the Conservative Party have been consistently putting forward anti-choice private members' bills intending to restrict access, make it clear that they are interested in putting up barriers, as any of the barriers that they can, to make it more difficult for women to access abortion. And I think if you look at the province of PEI, Prince Edward Island, there are no abortions available at all. New Brunswick, a woman has to pay at the clinic. There are approximately 1,000 abortions done in New Brunswick a year, and maybe 600 to 700 done at the clinic in Fredericton, and they have to pay out of pocket. And this is an extremely difficult situation. And the people who are most affected, of course, are women who are most vulnerable. And I think when we look at how we have to fight back against these attacks on reproductive justice, it's very important to go to the campaign that was waged in this country in the 80s and the 90s. And I think it will give us an interesting understanding of how women from a variety of different communities came together with allies in the trade union movement and within the faith communities, on the student movement and the campuses, and were able to make a huge step forward. And so this is tremendously important. So I want to go back in history a little bit, and when I was thinking about it today, we started that particular campaign fall of '82. So we're talking almost 30 years, which is hard for me to believe, but it's true. And excuse me, we were we were dealing with a situation then where there was access to abortion, but it was very privileged access. Middle-class women who had a private gynecologist, who could afford a trip to the United States or to Montreal, had access to abortion. But First Nations women on reserve, young women, rural women, women who had recently come to the country, immigrant women, women who were not connected to the healthcare system, those without health cards, they did not have access. And it was an extraordinary situation. I remember back in those days, and for many of you who may find this hard to believe, in order to try and access an abortion, you had to call up if you didn't have a private gynecologist at a clinic at Toronto General, and the lines open at 8:30, and there's no redial. You couldn't just push and push and push. You just had to dial and dial and dial. And it usually would take about 45 minutes to get through, and then when you got through, normally speaking, all the appointments were gone. So imagine what the situation would be for a young woman in school, or a woman working in a plant or factory, any workplace situation where she didn't have access to a phone. I mean, she was denied access in a sense. And so there was a country that purported to have universal health care. It's becoming clearer and clearer that's not the case, but purported certainly in those days to have universal health care. It was a two-tiered system. Women who had privilege, had money, could access abortion. Those who didn't could not. And it was an absolutely untenable situation. And women had been struggling around this and struggling for quite a long time. Made changes here, a little access increase here, back forth, back forth. But in truth, the situation was not changing in any fundamental way. And women who were active in the Immigrant Women's Health Center, which is still a service that is down there on College Street today, the place where I work, Hassle-Free Clinic, and others came together, and we looked at the circumstance and said, this is just not acceptable. The women we serve are not getting access, and something has to be done about it. And we thought long and hard, what are we going to do? Where have there been successful campaigns in the past? What can we do to make a very difficult situation somewhat better? We had no idea it was going to take us as long as it did. But we did. We looked around the world, and we saw countries like Italy, which was primarily Catholic, had better access than Canada. Britain had just gone through a whole struggle on it. And in Quebec, the province of Quebec, in our own country, had much, much better access than we did here in Ontario or any place else in English Canada. And the reason why was because a campaign was struck, a campaign that was broad-based, a campaign that included a doctor willing to challenge the law, and a broad-based movement that included the unions, included women's organizations, included faith groups, included a whole range of progressive-minded people, immigrant communities as well, who said this cannot maintain. And the doctor who had fought that fight in Quebec was Dr. Henry Morgentaler. He's become a fairly famous guy. Morgentaler clinics exist, in different parts of the country. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he felt strongly about this particular question. And he had, in the province of Quebec, been brought to trial on a number of occasions, and on each occasion he was found innocent, though he clearly broke the law. And I remember one such incident, and his clinic had been raided, and they chose one woman who had been there seeking an abortion. Now, who did they choose? They chose an immigrant from Africa. Very interesting, right? And an English-speaking immigrant in a primarily French-speaking province. And so the prosecutor put her on the stand, destroying any medical confidentiality, of course. And they thought they could bring someone who would not connect with the jury of Francophone men and women. and they questioned her, etc. She talked about why she was seeking the abortion and why the legal aspect of it wasn't there for her, the legal route wasn't there, and they thought this would clinch the case. Well, as it turned out, the jury found the doctor innocent, even though he clearly broke the law. And the jury afterwards said, you know, the men and women on that jury said, you know, and they recognized what was happening. They put someone who they thought was so different from us, but you know, she was like our mother, our daughter, our wives, our partners, and we saw her situation and we sympathized with it, and we said, no, this doctor is doing the right thing. And so this attempt to essentially divide people on basis of language, race, and everything else did not work, because the people on that jury in Quebec saw what was going on. They saw the reality of this woman's life, which was so symbolic of the reality of so many women's lives. They found the doctor innocent. So we said, all right, if we're going to do something in this province, let's do it in a dramatic fashion. Let's build that broad movement that women and men in Quebec had done, and let's see if we can find a doctor who will challenge. And we tried to find doctors here. We did. But it's not an easy thing. You're risking your practice, you're risking your financial security, you're risking your family. You could potentially go to jail, because Morgentaler did go to jail. He went to jail in Quebec. He served 10 months, and he was finally let go because he had been beaten up by anti-Semitic guards, and the situation became so untenable for the government, they allowed him to leave jail. And we had a situation in which we asked Henry Morgentaler, would you do this again? He said, how can I do it again? You know, I went through such upset, my family, this, that, I can't do it. But he thought about it, and he did. He decided, yes, I'll do it, but the only reason I will do it, what has to be in place, is a movement to fight alongside me. And he didn't want to be the leader, he wanted to be part of a movement. And we said, well, we will do that. And we did. And we said, again, how are we going to build something? We know that there is a lot of pro-choice sentiment, if you want to call it that, out there. But it wasn't organized. And in order to tip the balance of power, any struggle, any social movement, in order to tip the balance of power, you have to be able to gain such broad forces that will push back against what we had: two levels of government and an organized anti-choice movement. So we felt it was important for us to determine in strategy, how are we going to frame this debate? How are we going to make this a question that will have broad reach, that will go across the country and reach all segments of society? And we had worked before on the issue, and I mentioned the Immigrant Women's Health Center. In 1978, we had been struggling around some access issues here. And the women in that center talked about what we said at that time, we called then reproductive rights. Today it's reproductive justice. And that we have to frame a campaign that also gives women the sense that there's a broad context to the fight we're involving ourselves in. Because women also have to have the right to have the children they choose to have. And so we have to put the issue of abortion in that larger reproductive rights framework. And we did that. So we talked about choice. And what is choice? I mean, it was popularized in the United States and many other countries. It wasn't something we invented, for sure. It's the legal democratic right to determine for oneself that you can make the decision whether or not to continue an unplanned pregnancy. There was a therapeutic abortion, there was a law which included therapeutic abortion committees at hospitals, not all hospitals. And what it was 3 doctors were there to decide, they would have never met you, whether or not you had the right to have an abortion. Untenable. It takes that decision right away from the hands of women. But it also had what we felt were racist, class bias method of operation. Because very often, the women who had access to the hospitals were middle-class women who had the gynecologist, as I was saying before. And in some situations, it wasn't always the situation, you had a woman coming saying, I would like to have an abortion, and she may have had 3 children. And if she was a woman with a disability, or if she was a First Nations woman, or if she was a woman of color, particularly a black woman, the therapeutic abortion committees would say, well, all right, if you agree to be sterilized, we will allow you to have an abortion. So there were abuses of that sort. It wasn't happening everywhere, but it was happening enough. We had anecdotal evidence of that. So we felt, in order to build a movement, we had to cut through all of those And we weren't just looking for the right to choose, because unless you had the facilities there, unless you had the resources to pay for it, unless you had access, it didn't make a difference if there was a democratic right or not. So when we talked about choice, we were talking about a whole range of women's issues. The right to have birth control in our own languages and our own communities, the right to a decent job, the right to child care, the right to be free of coerced or forced sterilization. I mentioned that, and these kind of things happen in northern communities as well. And of course, the right to full access to free abortion, the right to be able to live freely and openly, no matter what your sexuality. So there's a whole range of issues that we said, this is what women need to really have choices in our lives and in this society. And we know the society is not granting us this. But full access to free abortion was a particular issue at that time, which was hitting the most vulnerable women in this country in a very significant way. And we felt we had to fight a single issue. In one sense, we wanted full access to free abortion. We wanted to overturn that federal law so that women were not criminals. And we wanted to have clinic procedures available, freestanding clinics outside of hospitals that were fully covered by the healthcare system. This is what we wanted. But we framed it, as I say, in the broader framework of a reproductive rights context, and that was tremendously, tremendously important. So we moved forward, and we had to test the waters. I mean, anyone who's been involved in social movement building, you have to test the waters. What is the story? Is there support out there? Or if there is, will that support be organized? So we chose to do a meeting at this very building, Oise, downstairs in the auditorium. And it was we didn't know. We had speakers. We had people from the Immigrant Women's Health Center, from women working with immigrant women. We brought women in from northern Ontario. We brought someone from the trade union, Louis Lenkinski, I remember him, who was the Secretary-Treasurer of the Ontario Federation of Labor. A whole range of different speakers. And when we called the meeting and the time was coming, suddenly, we were saying, people are going to come. Suddenly, there were lines and lines of people trying to get in. The auditorium was so filled, the security wouldn't let anyone else in. There was a line all the way from the subway station to here, coming up and around the corner. It was extraordinary. It was a hugely, hugely successful meeting. And people pledged that if we began a campaign, they would be there for it. A big, half-page, three-quarter page in the Star, with all kinds of signatures. So we started it with a bang. And we went to the Ontario Federation of Labor Convention. Women Working with Immigrant Women was an organization that worked very, very closely with us, building meetings in diverse communities across the city, because we wanted this to be a movement that women and men, because it was men as well, who were involved in this, though it was mainly women, I will say that, felt was theirs. That there's this, thank you very much. I'm suffering from a bit of a cold, as you can tell. So the campaign began, and we said what we're going to do is we are going to establish a clinic. We're going to establish a clinic even though we knew that it was a direct challenge to the federal law. It was breaking the law to establish a clinic. Morgenthaler and two other doctors, Dr. Scott and Dr. Smalling, they said they would do it. We looked around, we found a building, we got it going, we started up, we got staff. But I will tell you, the heroines of that time, the heroines of that movement, were the women from every segment of society who chose to have an abortion in what was clearly an illegal facility. They knew they were breaking the law. They were putting themselves at risk. They were putting themselves up against police harassment, being trailed home, all of that. They are the heroines of the movement. Because if we had opened a clinic and no one came, well, thank you very much, but obviously this is not an issue that's hitting the Canadian populace in any significant way. We would have failed. There would have been no two ways about it. And it didn't take long. But the anti-choice, I talked about, we were up against the Conservative government in Ottawa, we were up against the provincial government here, and a very organized anti-choice movement. And they began picketing. And making it very difficult for women to go to the clinic. If the clinic was going to operate, well, they were going to do everything they could to stop it. And what we were able to do is build a huge network of escorts, women, young women mostly, but women of all ages from many different communities who would escort the women who had the appointments. We had safe houses all over the area on Harvard Street, women, men who would say, you can use my home. And so when the women would come for their appointment, they'd come not to the clinic, but to that safe house. And then a group of escorts would come with them, and they'd be walking down the street as though they're just a little gang of people walking down the street, and then, boom, in they go. And it protected the confidentiality of the woman involved, and it also gave her a tremendous sense of support, which was hugely important. But beyond that as well, it also helped build a movement that women and men, it's my phone, women and men felt that they were part and parcel of. And I think that is the critical piece, because movement building was what we were all about in every sense of the word. Because as I said before, if we couldn't change the balance of power in the country, then we weren't going to win this. And so naturally, of course, the police raided the clinic, they arrested the doctors, they confiscated the equipment, and charges were proceeding. They shut down the clinic, essentially. Now, we had a little arguments with some of the lawyers, and these are very good lawyers, very progressive lawyers, but they're lawyers, nothing against lawyers. But they like to see the way change takes place is through the courts. And I'm not saying we don't do a court challenge, because of course, you do a court challenge when you can, but it's not the only thing, because we felt so clearly that whether it be a judge here, a jury here, or a bunch of judges up in the Supreme Court in Ottawa, they are not in a vacuum. They are not in a vacuum. They'll look at the law, they'll look at the charter, they'll do all that, of course. But if it becomes obvious that such a law is unenforceable, such a law has no longer the respect of anyone in the country, doctors will, not pay attention to it. Women will go even though they know they're breaking the law, and that was critical. So we kept the movement building, and this is so important, because building movements is what makes change. I mean, I believe in my heart, and I've seen it, in this struggle and others before it, that people's collective strength, we have the power to make the change which will make a huge impact on our lives and the lives of those around us. So this was critical. So it was going through the courts. We kept up fighting for the, we had days of action, we had rallies, and we went to union local after union local, union picnic after union picnic. We went on campuses, we went to faith communities, we went to Iranian women's groups, we went to, just any group that would have us speak. And, people like Sharona Hall, who, passed away a few years ago, she was one of the founders of the Black Action Defense Committee, strong supporter from the start. Joan Grant Cummings, who was the first black president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, strong supporter. Women who were immersed in their own communities and their own issues came to the fore on this and built a very, very, very strong movement for change. Judy Prasad, Salome Lucas, many, many, many others. And so we were fighting and we were fighting. And then it came to the court. And there was the evidence, and it was clear. The evidence was right there. Did they break the law? Yes, they did. But then, of course, all the evidence came of why they broke the law. And the Crown said, it doesn't matter why. The question is, there's laws on the books, and we're a country of laws, and you have to respect the laws, and jury, you have no option but to find them guilty because they did it. They'd even admitted they did it. And the jury looked at them, they went away, they came back, innocent. Well, it was an extraordinary moment, absolutely innocent, because the jury knew they were going absolutely against the instructions of the court. And, I don't think the judge was particularly surprised, but the Crown was. And this was hugely important. So, naturally, it was appealed, and there was a whole long process there. But we felt, all right, they closed down the clinic, they confiscated the equipment, they did all that, and so women who were having access before now didn't have it. Let's open it. It's not over, we know, but let's open it. And so the Attorney General was trying to figure it out. And the anti-choice saw this too, and so Monday the clinic was open. There were 1,000 of them outside. The next day, 2,000. The next day, 3,000. We said, uh-oh, this is not good. And we called a big mass meeting at Trinity St. Paul's United. And all kinds of people came in who were part of the movement, who were not part of the movement. One of them to say, everyone was saying, for God's sakes, call a pro-choice demonstration. Call a demonstration of us. I don't know why we were so slow off the mark. You're right. Okay, so we called the demonstration within a few days for that, I think Friday night. I could be wrong, but I think it was a Friday night or maybe the Saturday night, but I think it was Friday. We were going through neighborhoods with cars with speakers on them, urging everyone to come out. And again, are they going to come? Are they going to come? And there it was, whatever time, 6 o'clock, something of that nature, 7 o'clock, I forget now. 10,000 came out. It was absolutely extraordinary. Auto workers came in from Oshawa. Business people, if you will, came with cleaning, that they just picked up after coming out of their law offices. Students came. People out of the hospitals, workers came from out of the hospitals on University Avenue. All kinds of people came. 10,000 came. And the chant was, the people have spoken, the clinic will be open. And then marched from Queen's Park to the Morgentaler Clinic. And I think that huge show of support is what stayed the hand of the Attorney General of the province and said, you know what, fine. You know, that's being appealed. They're still, you know, they won the one, but, and they decided they would not shut it down. And I think this talks to you about, you know, what some might call the United Front, movement building, getting people involved at the rank and file level. You know, I'm a trade unionist, that's the language I use, to be able to be a part of a movement that makes such a difference. And it's the strength of this movement which stops the hand of the state sometimes. Not always, sometimes. But this time it did. We had the popular opinion. And we were doing speaking engagements, flying all over the place, you know, with Morgentaler, et cetera. And I will tell you, he grew to be this incredible hero. You know, an Auschwitz survivor. He became, I flew out with him a few times on different trips, and we were going to Vancouver once, and the pilot came out to get his autograph one time. Well, who was flying the plane, you say, but, or, you know, I was in Montreal, and, you know, the cab driver would not take money because how he had helped a girlfriend of his, and these kind of things, just having dinner, walking through an airport, it was just unbelievable. Thank you, doctor. I mean, just, people just spontaneously, I mean, it was amazing, frankly, in many senses. But again, Morgentaler was important because he was challenging the law, but he also knew and appreciated that he was part of a broader movement, and if that movement wasn't there, it wouldn't have kept, he wouldn't have been kept out of jail. And I think that's critically important. So, I don't know, I'll rush around here. So, it continues and continues. We keep building, we don't leave it to the lawyers, we put it's on the ground, and we keep stressing, what do we mean by choice? And it's not just a legal right, as I said before. Now, it's part and parcel. And I think when we went to unions, we went to immigrant organizations, we were able to frame it in such a way that people identified whether they were personally in favor of abortion or not. I mean, my mother was, you know, Catholic, 6 children, 10 pregnancies, the whole bit, never would have had abortion, but totally supported a woman's right to choose because she understood what the reality of women's lives were about. And this is what we wanted, and that's what we tried to do. So we inched our way all the way through up until the Supreme Court. And we didn't know. We had good lawyers. We had done all our work. We had our days of action. And we made it a key political issue. There's no two ways about it. It was a sharp issue across the country. And everyone says, oh, there's two extremes, or it's all polarized. It's not really polarized at all. There's a small minority who wants to deny women reproductive freedom, and then there's a vast majority, you know, with different levels of commitment to it, who essentially feel a woman should be able to make those decisions and have that basic right. So we were there. I was up in Ottawa when it happened. We were there, and I don't know, I mean, rarely does anyone sit in the Supreme Court, but they speak in such a language you don't even know what they've said. And I remember Henry running up to his lawyers, what did they say, what did they say? and it was so, you know, his wife pulling him back and all. But anyway, what happened, and I know this is now history, that they overturned the federal law. They overturned it in such a significant way. Not perfect, not everything, but they overturned it. So the doctors were free, clinics were able to open across the country, and that the healthcare system had to pay. And this was critical. The healthcare system had to pay. Women should not have to pay out of pocket. And that's why what's happening right now in New Brunswick is absolutely reprehensible. You know, but that's what's going on there. And this was a huge step forward. We knew it. It wasn't everything by a long shot. Did we win reproductive justice on every front? No, we didn't. But we won a very significant step forward. And this was an historic battle between the women's movement, its allies, and the state. And we came up on top. Now, immediately, of course, they tried to start a new law. This was the Mulroney government, a new law, okay. And they changed, they were going to have it so you needed 2 doctors to give permission, and you needed this and you needed that. And they thought they'd make it liberal enough so that doctors would agree to it. Well, they didn't. They didn't. The OMA, the CMA, the Canadian Medical Association didn't, the National Organization of Immigrant and Visible Minority Women, the National Council of Jewish Women, the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, the YWCA, the Canadian Labour Congress. I mean, what you might call fairly mainstream organizations, the United Church of Canada, right off the bat, no. No recriminalization of women. Absolutely not. Now, during this time, all right, the anti-choice is strategizing as well. And they said, well, all right, let's try and make this unworkable, you know, okay. And so they started doing what they called Operation Rescue, blockading clinics, physically stopping women from accessing abortion. And they tried to take on the mantle of the civil rights movement in the States, saying, we are the saviors of the unborn. We are taking up the mantle of Martin Luther King. We are, and it was absolutely disgusting. And the thing that was so remarkable is that it didn't win anywhere. And people in the black community particularly, because that was the mantle they were trying to take up in the United States and here, spoke out and said, absolutely not. And I know there was a woman who, she was trying to access, because we were there defending the clinics. We'd sleep over the night in the clinics, get out there and have our ring of people before theirs came. It was almost hand-to-hand struggling for periods of time there. Olivia Chow and Jack Layton, I must say, were right in the midst of it all, as were many. Anyway, I won't go into the names, but it was quite amazing. But there was one young woman who was from the black community, and she was interviewed, and she was very brave to be interviewed, and on one of the TV stations, because they were blockading her entrance. And she said, they don't know my life, they don't know who I am, they have absolutely no right to make this decision for me. I am going through, and just rammed right her way. And again, someone like that who, I don't care who says what about me. This is my right, and they have no right. And I don't think she was aware, particularly if they were trying to pretend they were, having the legacy of Martin Luther King. But this was the feeling of the women who are accessing those procedures, and that's why I say they're the heroines, and they are the ones who really, really fought and won this battle. So Operation Rescue, it was the Scott Clinic, the Morgenthaler Clinic, all of them. They were trying to blockade and shut them down, and they were not able to do it. They were not able to do it every time. And there was argument. Do we have the police do it, or do we do it ourselves? No, we wanted people to be there, so they felt whatever victory happened was their victory. It wasn't someone doing it for them, it was their victory. And so in the end, we were able to win the Operation Rescue battle, and we were able, by one vote in the Senate, believe it or not, to defeat the new law. It was absolutely amazing. One vote. And so there was no new law. And this was incredibly, incredibly important. And there are 1,000 stories I can tell. But one of the things also in this province, which I think was one of the best things we were able to do, was not only were the clinics made legal, and others opened up in different areas of Ottawa and others around the Toronto area, and they were fully funded, but we also were able at that point to have 4 centers set up in different areas of Ontario where you could access abortion without a health card. And this is the only procedure, unless I think now you can access midwives without a health card. You didn't need a health card. So for the many, many, many women without status, this was a huge breakthrough. It's almost not even that well known today, but it still is there and still exists. But those are the kind of things that were so important, because if you win a right for some women, you have to win that right for all women, or otherwise it's pretty hollow. And I think that was that really informed us and informed our struggle. So here we are, many years hence, and there are over 30 clinics in all areas of the country, St. John, Fredericton, out west, Alberta, all over the place. But as I was saying, we are still in a battle. We never won everything. We won huge steps forward, absolutely. And when women and men came out to defend the clinics around Operation Rescue, the reason they did it was because they felt this was their battle, this was their victory, and someone was trying to take it away from them. So they came out and they fought. And I know, somewhat recently, fighting the different health, the amalgamations of hospitals and all the problems we're up against now, I was asked to go up to Midland, Ontario, because there's a Catholic hospital in Penetanguishene, and Midland, generally known to be more of an orange kind of town in the sense of Protestant, and Penetanguishene was more French. So there's all enmity there, and a long time ago, and maybe not so long ago. But anyway, the Catholic hospital was going to take over the Midland hospital. Well, that would mean no more abortions, no more access to emergency contraceptive, no more dignity of death, or being able to, determine your own the way of dying. And I was invited up, as were others, to a huge public meeting. And it was an extraordinary meeting. There must have been 500 people filling the community center hockey rink. And there were, First Nations people from Christian Island. There were teenagers. There were, older women who had retired up there, who had fought the good fight. And they were there, and they had really believed, and they do believe, that they had won this victory, and no one was going to take it away from them. The doctors, the nurses, everyone was there, and they overturned that particular thing. I made it very clear. I mean, my name's Carolyn Doherty Egan, obviously Irish Catholic, and that's why I said this is not a Catholic Protestant fight. This is a fight for reproductive justice. This is a fight for women's rights. And you know, the Catholic Protestant thing has nothing to do with it. So let's not get those old flames going. Let us just keep the hospital open. And they were able to keep the hospital open because everyone came together. But it was a memory of what things had been in the past. They didn't want to go back to it, particularly in a more rural area of Ontario where services are very, very hard to come by. So we're in a situation now where there was a huge fight over many, many years. We won it. They came back at us. We won it again. And the problem today is there's a little bit of sense of, well, we have won it, you know, particularly in an urban center. We have won it, particularly if you're reasonably middle class, well off, whatever. You can access abortion. But the thing is, there's so many who are still at risk, who are still vulnerable, and areas of the country that are not served. The healthcare cuts, the austerity agenda, all trying to claw back whatever way we can. And now when we've got Hudak, our man who wants to run for the Premier of Ontario as a Conservative Party, who at one point signed a petition saying abortion should be defunded. And the three Conservative MPs who a week and a half ago or whatever had a press conference at Queen's Park saying that they think that abortion should be defunded. You know what? If a woman wants an abortion, fine, we don't care. They really do, of course. But we shouldn't pay for it. This is the angle. This is the angle. Anti-choice by stealth. This is what they are trying to do. And they're trying to say, oh, in this time of austerity, we can't fund something like that. As though somehow going through a pregnancy and birth would be cheaper than... I mean, it doesn't even make sense economically. It doesn't even make sense. But this is what we're up against. We're up against people who absolutely do not feel women have the right to make those decisions themselves. And I think, it's a very short... it must be time for me to end, right?
Yeah. Not that anyone's in a hurry to...
Oh, right. I think we're in a circumstance, a situation in which we have a wonderful legacy where we're one of the few countries in the world where this battle has been fought and such gains have been made because we have it fully funded, those who have health cards, and in some places like Ontario, even those who do not have status have access because of the struggle of a movement that tried to put the reproductive rights, reproductive justice context forward so that no woman should be left behind. And that's what we tried to do. We made some gains, not everything by a long shot, but it was a very, 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 very important step forward for women's rights in this country. And now they're trying to take it away from us under the guise of the austerity agenda, under the guise, and we can talk about it, of sex selection, under the guise of trying to protect the unborn. And I think, I do a lot of talking in schools. I don't see, at least in the city of Toronto, very much openness to that argument. I mean, I go to schools all over the place, and because I've been doing this for 30 years or so, all the schools pretty much used to be white, not entirely. Now you go to the schools, there's barely, it changes dramatically, and it doesn't matter. Young people are pro-choice, no matter what their backgrounds, no matter whether they were born here, no matter whether they're from the Caribbean, or Africa, or South Asia, or China. You hear them speak, and there'll be a few in every classroom, like they always have, who may be opposed to a pro-choice position. But by far and by large, people have now been brought up in a country where the access to health care, access to birth control, access to abortion is there, and they don't want to lose it. But the thing is, if we don't organize that, we don't organize it in the same kind of broad-based united front that we had before, we are in danger of losing certain aspects of this. I am not an alarmist. I think that, we've won every private members' bill debate that's come out, but we cannot allow our guard to go down because they will take advantage of it. And I'll just end by saying there was a young Lakota woman up here on the weekend. There was a premiere of a film on a reserve in North Dakota. And when North Dakota was going to pass a law, they were trying to pass a law to make abortion illegal except for rape or incest, the Pine Ridge Reserve up there, they said, there was a woman chief who said, not on this reservation. We will allow abortions. We will have set up an abortion clinic on this reservation. We will allow abortions to take place here. And this talks about that struggle and the struggle for emergent contraceptive pills and other reproductive right within the Aboriginal community. And I think you can look at all kinds of struggles in North America, in the States, it's a different situation here. The women are fighting back, and they will fight back. And we just don't want to get a situation where we're on the edge of losing something. We don't have to lose it. We know how to build a movement. We know what will maintain and win struggles for us, and it's the coming together of progressive people, you know, who feel very, very strongly that this is something that has to be fought for and kept. And I think, you know, the history informs that, and I think that we certainly can do it, but we have to keep vigilant. So I'll end there, and we can ask questions and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And now I'll be taking a speaker list if everyone wants to raise their hands. Can't quite see in that direction, so just hold on.
Sorry.
No hands yet?
There will be.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know why the change of wording from reproductive rights to reproductive justice.
Okay, yeah. Good question. So do you want to take a few questions before I come back?
Yeah, I'll take
Yes.
a few questions before. Sorry, did you have your hand up there? Okay, go ahead.
Well, mainly just a couple of personal anecdotes. I think I love the fact that Carolyn touched on the fact that now in 2012, it's people, a lot of us don't even think that we need to be having this discussion any longer because it's become common sense. When I was young, in the 80s, I remember some of the battles that Carolyn talked about. I didn't take part in them. I went to Catholic school, in grade school and high school, and so I remember hearing stuff in class from the opposite side of the argument on this. But I remember my childhood was characterized, going to Catholic school was characterized by this argument around abortion, and should it be legal or not. And I think one of the great legacies of this movement that Carolyn was a part of is the fact that the generation that's younger than me, the people who are now in their 20s, to them it's simply common sense that this should be allowed and people should have access to it. And so I think that's a real testament to the impact that a social movement has. And I think it also speaks to how the way that the pro-choice movement was organized, that it didn't simply rely on elites and high-profile support and a bunch of legalistic arguments in a court, but it actually was based on the self-activity of ordinary people fighting for a right that they felt they had a real investment in. Excuse me. And just to touch on the impact that that has had and still has, I was working in a very rich restaurant a couple of years ago, and Henry Morgenthaler came in one night as a guest, and one of the other guests in the restaurant, who was dressed in a suit that must have cost about $4,000, went by Henry's table and just said he wanted to thank him for everything Henry had done. And so I think that gives some sense as well of the broad-based kind of support that this has.
I just said go ahead.
Hi. So sorry for my English is not that good. I'm trying to be clear. I came from Colombia and I was working in Chile last year. And I was wondering how you can, I mean, I know that in these topics there's a lot of fear. People sometimes are willing to make public appearance and public debates. And what is pretty normal, people are just afraid to participate. How you can move these topics in countries like ours, I mean Colombia and Chile, when sometimes political participation is not that active, and when courts are just not willing to make, I mean, I am aware that the courts works completely different here and there, but when courts are not willing to make this change and this shift between legal arguments and political and justice, I mean, in the case of women, in access to reproduction rights.
think any movement's ability to make forward movement, it depends on where are people at and how prepared are they to challenge the situation. And I think if you had tried to do this in 1962 or 72, possibly, although I think maybe in 72 it might have flown, but the strength of the church, the sort of the relative strength of different ideas and arguments, it depends on what's going on. I'm thinking about Ireland right now because last week the first abortion clinic was opened in Ireland was it in Belfast? And there were huge protests by the church, by all kinds of people to close it down. But it's not the same as 20 years ago. There are many developments in terms of what people feel is their right. And so I think that question of how do you move it forward in different contexts. I mean, there was an attempt, I think it was in Portugal, a boat called Women on Waves, where a doctor from the Netherlands went in a boat and basically broke the law by basically, I think it was the emergency contraceptive pill on board, but they said they would be doing abortions on the boat, and they challenged it. And it actually provided a focal point to challenge the status quo. And so I think all of those questions about tactics and about how do you move things forward, different ways that you can challenge a situation that's unjust. I think the story of how it was pushed forward in Ontario really tells you about, because you could have had nobody come to that meeting, and I think that then in 1982 it might have been that would have been the dead end, really. But there was an appetite for challenging, and so it's measuring that. And how do you know that? I think you have to just try.
Hey, Ben? I was just thinking, after reading somebody's post today about Andrew Todd and saying, does anybody not see that this is not about bullying per se, this is also about sexism and misogyny. And in thinking about that situation, thinking about the situation that we're seeing with the Tories, also, it's not just abortion rights. They've also pulled although there's been legislation that has been fought in the courts for years to try and bring pay equity for women. So those laws are on the books now, but basically the Tories have said, we're not even going to pay attention to that. So any challenges that you have in that area. And it's just seeing how, and I think Carolyn said it, that it's tied into the austerity agenda, the idea that we just don't have any money, we can't do this stuff, we can't, and the creeping pullback of all of the rights that women have fought for, we're seeing that slide back. And so it seems like it feels like the time to start to move forward on those things. I mean, I think this is one challenge, and I think, again, it's putting it in the context not of just this one issue, but of the broader situation of reproductive justice and rights for women, and fighting the sexism that's creeping its way back in on the backs of this economic crisis.
Okay, Peter.
Thanks, yeah. That was a super inspiring talk, and it's, I'm not old enough to remember all that type of stuff, but you can get a feeling, a flavor for it, like going out on these demonstrations for reproductive rights and all that type of stuff, because there's no matter what size the group is, it's always like super, it feels powerful, because it's like, as so many signs, like you can take a scan of any demonstration across the world, and you'll see this sign, like it's 2012 or insert whatever year, and we're still fighting for this shit. And we are still fighting for it, right? And I think it speaks to something like their side is organized, right? It's organized, it's well funded, it's quite small, but it's certainly well funded. And it makes me think about that this fight it's a fight that their side, while they might have some differences, there's a lot they have in common. And I think of how the anti-choice people have appropriated the language of civil rights and that type of stuff. And it makes me also think of the move for charter schools in the United States that's also done the same thing, and it's trying to reappropriate the notion of civil rights and of racial justice, but for something that all those things back quite a ways. And one of those movies that's out now, you can see it. Don't see it, please. But it's called Won't Back Down, which is like, it's done in that sort of like inspiring like activism. It's parents getting active and fighting back. But really, what it is that it's a film that's promoting the privatization of schools as an attack on teachers' unions, and in a way to open up schools for software developers and all these people that have a wealth of investment in there. And it makes me think that, I mean, their side is organized and our side too has to be organized. And so, I mean, you can hear Carolyn talking about how the movement was organized, and I think we as the international socialists who put on this meeting, like we want to be involved in these type of movements. We want to provide an organized revolutionary current inside these movements that can make these things class issues, so that the women's rights movement or the pro-choice movement is not just about challenges in the court, but it is about uniting across class and fighting against not only the anti-choice people, but against the people that would have racism, homophobia, and all that in our schools too, and that would be cutting people's living standards down to the bone. And so there's an email list going around. I encourage you to sign it up. Let us know if you're on a campus or if you're in a workplace, because we want to be organized to be able to counter the other side that has tons of money but doesn't have the same passion, or I don't think the same real majority that that our side does.
All right, John?
Well, I do. I am old enough to remember.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And it would be great to have an opportunity for Carol and Michelle and some other people who were around from the very beginnings of this. I'm not going to pretend that I was. Who were there from the very beginnings, to just tell like the great stories and anecdotes because there were so many fantastic opportunities, but there was a great opportunity for people like myself who really do believe that the rising of the women is the rising of us all. An old saying, but an absolutely true saying. That this had to be a movement that was led by women, organized by women, primarily involving women, but had to have as broad an alliance space as possible. And that meant that there were people in our movement who didn't look like they were in our movement. I mean, people like my mother, who was not progressive on any other issue, born in the 1920s and in a fine old Ontario family, but she became a nurse, and she went as a young nurse to work in Muskoka, which it was not in the at the end of the 30s, the resort place it is now. It was like Appalachia. It was hillbilly land, and what she saw around the self-induced abortions, botched backroom abortions, changed her life absolutely. And the one thing that she was absolutely ironclad clear about, and the only reason that she even gave me any kind of a pat on the back for being a socialist, was that I supported abortion rights, and that I knew that woman right over there because she saw Carolyn on TV and said, she's a fantastic woman. When I was able to say, that's my friend and comrade, this woman actually said, well, maybe it's not such a bad thing that you're doing. So anyway, that got me off the hook. But it also meant that there were people like my mother here active in the movement who were able to go to their meetings where they were planning what they were going to do to shut down that clinic. And they say, we're going to show up at 5 o'clock. We're going to be there with thousands of people at 5 o'clock. Yeah, we knew about it. We knew about it almost every single time. They never were able to steal a march on us. And because we had a great, along with organization, a great ability to gather intelligence and organize our response. So if they were there at 4:30, we were there at 4. And literally, that's the game that we played. If they were going to, and if it meant that they were going to be there so early, there's no way that we had to camp out sleepovers at the Morgentaler Clinic. And so when they were coming up to the door and nobody was outside, and they thought, oh, we're here first time. And we came busting out the doors, and we're here and defended the front door and kept the the place open, the, the, the droopy, the frowns, it was really, it was worth, you know, it was worth staying up all night or missing sleep or whatever it took. And those kind of people need to know those kind of aspects of the story as well, because the you know, the connections that we made are still there. And I saw people on Saturday at the rally that I haven't seen in years, and it's like old home week to see them and to know that they're still there, they're ready to go, they're still ready to infiltrate the other side's meetings if we have to do that again. What I would like you to speak to, Carolyn, I know I've gone on too long, is why these guys must know that these private members' bills are going to get shot down. So why, it's just like, one's down, and it's like 2 days later they announce the next one. And, you know, so it doesn't seem to me like they really think that they're going to pass. So why are they keep, you know, what's the deal with this?
Yes, that's a good question.
What's the deal?
I wanted to say something, but I'm hesitant to put myself on the speaker list. I want to give people a chance to talk. I just wanted to speak maybe as a younger person who wasn't, well, I was probably around, but small. I think a lot of people don't hear these stories, and they're really important because people forget how the fight that took place. And for people that were fighting now, who try to encourage other people to fight back on different struggles. And the myriad of a lot of young people is that, well, these fights that happened before, these things were just given to us. And if we just wait, they'll be given to us again. Because they just assume that politicians have their finger in the temperature of the water and actually know what's going on, and they don't. And I just think it's really important to hear that story. And I had chills up my spine when you were talking about just waiting for people to show up, because I do the same thing. And I wanted to really thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Should I?
Yeah.
Okay, they're good questions. And why did it change from reproductive rights to reproductive justice? Well, my understanding of why it changed was because I think people were concerned that it's just not an issue of individual rights, it's an issue of justice. And I think that was the philosophy behind it. And that's fine. I mean, we use reproductive rights, reproductive freedom, but, you know, this is today's world, it's a little bit different, and I think that makes perfect sense. And I think the argument is it's an important one, you know. And like, no, I might just throw in here the sex selection business. I don't know if I'm going to open a storm here, but I didn't put it in the talk as a whole, but it sort of relates to what John was asking too, and then I'll go to the other questions as well. I think what the anti-choice is doing, whatever my readings of, you know, in days gone by, they wanted the whole thing. They wanted outright banning of abortion. That's what they wanted. That's what they weren't going to compromise on it. That was it. Now, they'll take incremental changes if that'll create barriers. And I think what they're trying to do is slowly move the discussion to the right, if I may use that term, slowly move things from closer to an anti-choice perspective. And yes, they raise up. They've been trying everything. You know, when a woman who's pregnant is shot by a mad boyfriend or something, they don't want him charged just with her murder. They want the murder of the fetus to be a charge as well, because they think that is a step on the way to personhood of the fetus. So they have these sort of somewhat convoluted, but if you start examining it, you know, reasons in which they feel they can gain the sympathy. And people would be sympathetic. Oh my God, yes, a fetus was killed by a murderous boyfriend. Therefore, we should change the law. And people, doing it because they don't like domestic violence, they may have that, but what they want to do is really change the situation. So then they would have something that they could then build a case to on the question of personhood. And the sex selection thing, it's a difficult thing for people to come to grips with sometimes. And I know that I've been interviewed on CBC, et cetera, on this thing. And now, in this country, if you look at the study that was done, that was suggesting in the third or fourth pregnancy, women of South Asian background seem to be having more boy children than girl children. And then there was a question of South Korean women. And but the actual authors of the study, if you look at them, studies themselves, and hear the question asked directly, that you can make absolutely no judgment on why that's occurring. There's a whole range of reasons. We have a big immigration in this country from South Asia. Many women could be coming here pregnant, and they do. I know, I work in a sexual health clinic. They come here pregnant, and then they have their children. And so it totally skews what could potentially be, or is there something that for whatever reason, that South Asian women in the third and fourth pregnancy tend to have miscarriages at a greater rate with female fetuses or embryos than male. I mean, there are more males born anyway than females. The normal stat is higher. And what is increasing this? They have no idea. And I think anyone who works in an abortion clinic, I mean, how many people are actually coming in to have abortions at 18 to 20 weeks? You know what I mean? And it's not. So there's a lot of question about what, and you're also stereotyping particularly communities as though somehow these communities are more sexist. These communities as people were saying in the discussion, the level of domestic violence in a country like Canada, the fact that we don't have equal pay for work of equal value, the whole range. You just look at city council, look at parliament. I mean, are women equal there to men? No, the numbers are totally skewed. And so, gender bias and sexism exists in every community. So what they're trying to do is, well, feminists, if you're a feminist, doesn't it offend you? That women should be able to have abortions on the basis of sex selection. Well, as Vernon Dickinson, who I think is still he teaches, a professor at U of T, he said, so what you're going to do is allow a graduate student who got pregnant because birth control failed, and she feels she wants to finish her thesis on time, she can have an abortion. But a South Asian woman, who has 4 kids already at home, and you don't really know why she wants to have that fifth abortion, the abortion for the 5th pregnancy, well, you're not going to allow it because it may be for sex selection. I mean, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And if you start looking into how are you going to determine what is in a woman's head when she determines whether or not to end a pregnancy, it's her decision. And what we have to do is fight sexism and gender oppression on every level so that girl children are valued in the same way that boy children are. I remember growing up, and there were 2 friends of my parents, both had 4 children, we had 6. We had 3 boys, 3 girls. They had all girls. And there was always, oh, the poor Martins, the poor Eatons, they don't have any boys. Who's going to carry on the family name? And this was a constant refrain everywhere. Oh, how sad. They didn't have any boys. I mean, well, come on. I mean, of course, that was ridiculous. But that kind of, it exists. It exists in every culture. But to somehow say that sex selection should be a reason why, and there is a new private member's bill trying to do exactly that, to ban abortions in Canada on the basis of sex selection. How in heaven's name are they going to prove that? How? But it's this incremental approach to try and find the issue that they think will gain more sympathy to put barriers in front of women. And so, nothing is simple. Do I support the concept of aborting a fetus because it's potentially female? Well, of course not. I mean, that's not the point. It's not the point. But the anti-choice, people who have never in their wildest dreams cared about the level of domestic violence or equal pay for work of equal value, any of the things the women's movement in child care. Why is there no national child care policy? You're such a family-friendly government. Why the hell don't you have a national child care policy? No, you don't want one, and you don't care about women, except that you're gonna be the standard bearer for female fetuses. It's just so contradictory. But I think that's what it's all about. They're just trying to move it slowly, incrementally. More to their side. In Colombia and Chile, I know the Catholic Church is very powerful, and Michelle was mentioning Ireland, and it's very powerful there too. And it's not an easy question. And for whatever reason, even in very progressive areas of Latin America, it's still something, and I don't know if it's a combination of machismo, Catholicism, whatever. I was brought up in the Catholic Church, but Portugal and Spain are not so terribly different, and there have been changes there, right? And when the Socialist Party was in power, a big change took place. It was sparked by what Michelle was talking about, by the Irish boat going, or the Netherlands boat going over. It had been in Ireland, then it moved there, and so I think, you know, there are women's organizations in Colombia, in Chile, that are struggling, and I know that you know it's a tough thing, but I think that if you're able to, in countries like that, to build support, see if you can get support in groups like the trade unions and others who may have a progressive point of view on such a question, so it's not viewed to be simply the small group of radical women. To slowly get support from progressive physicians, you know, trade unionists, student organizations, and build it so that it becomes broader. But you know, it's not easy. I know it's not easy. You know, and but if in Portugal, Spain, Italy, and now even, though this is the north of Ireland, and we know women in Ireland go to Britain. Thousands go every year. You know, and it's a Catholic country, but thousands go every year. But the church is a stronghold. You know, it's a very strong hold. But it's easing off. There used not to be allowed to be birth control. Used not to be allowed to be divorced, and that's now changed in you know, the Republic of Ireland. So it's tough. It's tough, but I think you'll see changes as time goes on. I think you will. You know, but it's not easy. I appreciate very much it's not easy, and I think that it's. So I'm trying to look at some of the other questions here. Telling the stories. I think you're absolutely right. The stories are extraordinary. In many senses, and when you live them, you have no sense you're making history, right? You're fighting a struggle like you'd be fighting one today or tomorrow. You know, you're out there in a demonstration or a rally, or you're fighting for, you know, keep a school open or stop cuts at a university or whatever the issue that motivates you might be, and you have no idea. You know, all we wanted to do was make abortion access easier to women. We didn't know that it was going to take so gosh darn long, and I don't know what we thought it'd be over in a year or two, and it didn't. It ended many years later. It's still not over. But I think that the stories are very important, particularly in today's world. Today's world is very, very tough. The austerity agenda, what we see going on around the world, people are suffering. People are having very, very hard times. The loss of jobs, the fact that people are getting out of school and not easy to find work. It's very, very, very tough, and it can be very challenging, and sometimes it can be very discouraging. And I think when you look back and you see struggles like this, you know, that we were up against governments, levels of governments, highly organized anti-choice, not big but powerful in the sense of being very well resourced, much better than we, but we were able to do it through the strength of people coming together. And I think that gives some sense of the possibility. I mean, we had one staff person at the height of the struggle. We made our money. We got money, you know, from unions and things like that, but through garage sales, through, oh my God, you know, it was just, you know, the day-to-day work of very, very committed people, and you can commit yourself at whatever level you so choose. Some just through their whole hearts and souls. Others came to bi-weekly meetings. Others came out to the rallies. Others, you know, would send a check or, you know, raise it in their women's group, or like John's mother, you know, do whatever she could to talk to friends or, you know, colleagues or whatever, and it just built and it built and it built. And I think that's why so many people feel the ownership of it. But it is true. You know, a generation that grew up with it here, and suddenly, is this really going to be taken away from me? And learning how it was fought, and no one, you know, aside from the, you know, I really think, I mean, Morgenthau, I tip my hat, and obviously the staff at the clinics, and the women who access the procedures. The rest of us were just ordinary people who threw our, you know, heart and soul into things, and we're just like anybody else. You know, we're just sort of dogged about it. So I think that's a huge lesson learned. And I think I can read my own writing. The Catholic schools. So I will say the Catholic schools. Many of us are alumni of Catholic schools, and you know, some of these huge marches that you see, or 10,000 march, whatever, on Ottawa. The Catholic schools ship the kids up there. I mean, come on, that's what happens, and so fine, that's what happens. But many, and you can see by the pro-choice movement of those of us who came through the Catholic school system, and I mean, when I was there, they weren't shipping us anywhere because abortion was just outright illegal. You didn't have to do anything about it. When you were, it might have been different, but they grow up, and then they think, and they look at the world around them, and they change their minds. Because Catholic women have abortions at the same rate as anyone else. We know that. Statistics show that everywhere. So women make up their own minds, and speaking out is hard. I don't think there's any doubt. And I think it's harder in a country like this, in the small towns, than in the big cities where you can be fairly anonymous. But that's why when Fort McMurray and Pictou County, Nova Scotia, et cetera, people, young women, older women would come out and set up a pro-choice table in the middle of the little town. These are hugely important things, because, yeah, what it's scorned by some, but it's hugely, hugely important. So anyway, I think that it's a great story because we won some huge demands. We know how we went about winning them, and we just had really strong support, and that's what saved the day. And I'll say, this is a meeting of the International Socialists, and I was when I first got involved in the reproductive rights movement or the pro-choice movement, I wasn't in the IS, and I've been through this and fighting this and pushing this battle and seeing some gains made. But what I realized is, and I was always sort of a socialist bent. What I realized is, we can fight forever for one reform after another, after another, after another, and yet, if the system stays the same, then there'll just be, bad times come and they'll just be pulled away from us. And that's why we have to do something that fundamentally changes the system that we live under, so it actually works in the interest of people, not in the interest of corporations. And I think, that's why I decided to join a group like the International Socialists, where I can certainly be a reproductive rights pro-choice activist and also, work for a bigger change in society as well. But I want to thank you all for coming out, and I think you'll be seeing more of what's happening. I mean, we're going to be up against a lot of different fights. We may have an election come the spring in this province, and the issue of abortion is going to be front and center. There's no two ways about it. It's going to be there. The defunding of abortion is going to be on the agenda in big, big ways. We cannot allow that to happen because we know who it will hurt. It will hurt the most vulnerable of women. And the middle class, the upper class woman can always access whatever she may need. But the most vulnerable women, the young women, the women of color, the new immigrants, First Nations women on reserves in the north, they are going to hurt, and they're going to hurt terribly. And we never want to go back to a time when women have to die in this country. And the last woman who died in this country of a botched abortion was in the 1990s. That wasn't that long ago. Yvonne Yorowitz over in Hyde Park. She was a 20-year-old student because with all the frou-frou about the new law, she thought it was illegal. And she self-induced and bled to death. And that's what her boyfriend told the press afterwards. She thought it was illegal. And the first woman who died after the Hyde Amendment in the United States was passed in the 70s, which took away Medicaid funding for low-income people for abortions, was a woman named Rosie Jimenez, a Hispanic young woman who went to a back alley abortionist because she could no longer have it paid for through the medical system. This is what's going to happen if the anti-choice have their way, if these Tory politicians have their way, and we cannot allow it. And so I think that's what the struggle is all about, and there'll be ways that in today's world that we can fight and win victories, hopefully, and push the struggle forward, not allow it to go backwards on us. So thanks very much.
And we're just going to end with a couple of announcements. We'll start with Michelle.
Just if anybody is interested in getting involved as we sort of remobilize around some of the issues happening in Ontario, particularly defunding or the threatened defunding of abortion, talk to me about getting involved in the Ontario Coalition for Abortion Clinics. We meet, at the moment we're meeting monthly, and there are lots of things that people can get involved in. One of the things that we do want to put a lot of effort into is campus outreach and making sure young women can get involved in this process of defending these rights.
Now Pam.
Okay, do you want to hold on to that so I can follow it?
Sure, I'll hold on to it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mia. And just wanted to say that we have several community events. First of all, if anybody wants to join our organization, we're fighting on many fronts. We're fighting at campuses, we're fighting across the city and involved in all these movements. So we would love it if you could join our organization. There are cards at the back if you can. You can talk to anybody of us about it. Just a couple of things coming up in the next couple of weeks on this campus. Monday, October the 29th, Sydney Smith Lobby, which is just down, Sydney Smith Lobby, that's over at 100 St. George. Is Canada a force for good in the world? So the questions of, is Canada a humanitarian force in the world or not? That's happening on Monday the 29th. And on Sunday, actually at the United Steelworkers Hall, which is a little bit further west, there is a discussion of a people's history of the War of 1812, which will not be the one that you learn about in your history book, let me tell you that. Those are on these cards if you'd like to find out. I'm just going to leave a green check at the back, and if you'd like to make a donation, that would be great. We need some help to any sort of a donation. And if you are on a campus and you'd like to get involved in